I just want to say, those of you who came when I was delivering a paper as Alison Donnell this afternoon, I haven't actually changed identity. It's just that Monica couldn't be here. She's had to leave for the UK. But I'm really happy to introduce Stewart Brown. I've already introduced him as a critic, and now I'm introducing him as a poet. Stewart's published 8 volumes to date, and I think that the kind of global indices of his work can be registered in the fact that he's published with presses as geographically distant as Trinidad and Wales. His latest collection, Elsewhere, is published by People Tree Press, was published by People Tree Press in 1999. And this edition is both selected poems from earlier works and also new poems. I guess what's significant about this collection in terms of our conference theme is the fact that the collection is arranged around 3 locales: Elsewhere, which is the Caribbean, really, Homework, which are British poems, and Africa, which speaks for itself. Although significantly, there isn't that kind of geographical containment. That's a kind of framework which the poems themselves are actually pushing against in interesting ways. And I think that hopefully some of the poems that Stewart will read, you'll see there's significant crossovers. I describe Stewart the academic as a very generous and modest scholar, and much of this temperament, I think, comes through in his poetry also, which is gentle, wry, and often understated. Although Philip Nanton's also observed its quiet authority, which seems a very accurate description to me. Having said that there's this quietness and stillness and gentleness, actually some of the poems are incredibly powerful and actually take us to very uncomfortable psychic places in terms of cross-cultural imaginings. The collection does also have a wonderful cricket poem, which I really hope, given that we've heard Stewart's take on other cricket poems, he's going to share with us tonight. So with no further ado, I'll hand over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. I'm not sure I can live up to that. I am going to read at least one cricket poem, but not the one you want me to read, I don't think, because I don't dare do the Bajan voice. I wanted to start with the only poem I have that has any vaguely Canadian connection, and that's only in terms of the story that it generated. It's a poem I wrote a long time ago when I was a teacher in Jamaica. It's a poem called Whales, with an H, whales, the giant sea mammal. And it was a poem that was written from the perspective... I was a teacher in a secondary school in Jamaica. Not one of the kind of grander secondary schools, but one of the ones that the World Bank built in the 70s and put nothing inside except an awful lot of kids and no materials and a few desperate teachers. And I taught there for a couple of years. And after a while got to see things to some extent from the point of view of the kids I was teaching. And this poem is written, if you like, about the tourist industry from that perspective. And it was published, the reason it has a connection with Toronto is it was published in the Jamaica Sunday Gleaner just before I left the island in 1974. And I travelled home the slow way, as it were. I went through America and Canada and got back to England, and there was a letter from the editor of the Gleaner, or the literary editor of the Gleaner, Cedric Lindo, who said that this poem had caused an international incident because it had been picked up by some Canadian tourists who came to the island and sent back to the Toronto Globe and Mail, who reprinted the poem, of course without anybody's permission, underneath a photograph of tourists being rafted down the Rio Grande in Jamaica with the headline, Black Radical Poet Condemns Tourism, which pleased me no end, I have to say. And indeed I got hate mail from tourists, a couple of letters saying, we believed all those smiling faces and now you've made us unhappy and we can't go back again. I was chuffed to bits about this. And the editor of the Gleaner said, well, you can dine out on this for several years now. And as you see, I still am. And I have to say, the government of Jamaica apparently, or at least the Ministry of Tourism, issued a disclaimer saying that Stewart Brown wasn't a black radical poet and he was actually nothing to do with them, and they didn't want anything else to do with him. So when I went back to Jamaica some years later, I was slightly disappointed that they let me in. You know, they have this huge book, this ledger, where they have people who are undesirable aliens. And I wasn't quite undesirable enough, or at least my undesirability had worn off a bit by then. So I was both pleased to be let in and slightly disappointed. And one of the other irony of this poem is that it's called Whales, and it's describing the rather large white tourists who flop onto the beaches in Jamaica at Christmas time. And when I wrote it, I was a somewhat svelte, long-haired youth. And of course, ironically now, there's no one who looks more like a whale on a beach in the Caribbean than the person who's reading this poem. Okay, and I have to change my glasses because this poor old whale can't see to read anymore. Whales. Each Christmas they come, white and blubbery from the frozen north, strange bloated creatures pale as snow, cruising in vast, unnatural shoals. Whales. The great white whales of myth and history in all their arrogant splendour, flopped ungainly along the sea's edge or hiding blistered under a shadowed palm, incredibly ugly somehow in their difference. Designated a protected species, they are chauffeured around, pampered like babes, and generally kept in the shade. Few stay long or leave anything behind except litter and small hostilities. Peace and love, we tell them. The government says we must show respect. So we smile, sing, play sambo, secretly long for a black Ahab. I don't know what they were worried about. I want to read this poem. I was kind of picking through, deciding what poems to read, deciding not to read those long, rather dark poems because, like I said on Tuesday, you've got to have some lightness amongst the grim stories. And my father died a year ago, and I haven't. The other day when I was talking, I put on the screen a beautiful memorial poem that Muriel Collins had written for her father, who died, and I realised I hadn't written that poem in terms of my own father. But finding this poem, I kind of think I wrote it beforehand. It's a poem called Glad Rags. Rummaging for old snapshots through a house no longer home, I find Dad's private wardrobe and discover, like a secret shame, his stockpile of retirement clothes. Blazers, flannels, shirts and vests, 2 pairs of buffed-up brogues, a smart man's hedge against the grey inflation of his days into a threadbare dotage. It is ironic, this late hoarding, to see out a life so blessed in its bare lack of acquisitions, no house, no car, and nothing owed. A life of grime, of beating steel into a weekly envelope that could just keep his family fed and clothed. He would not have that pressed and polished dignity betrayed now by a pensioned shabbiness, still less leave on that final jaunt turned out in any but his best. These furtive, mothballed glad rags are his chosen intimates, his clothes to be seen dead in, earned and paid for, like the rest. This poem is called Dead Men's Shirts. Don't know what you call a jumble sale in Canada. Anybody translate? Garage sale, yes. Well, my wife, at the time this poem was written, liked to go and bring me things back from the jumble sale. And my wife's name is Priscilla. It's called Dead Men's Shirts. Priscilla bought them at a jumble sale. A bargain, really, and I knew you wouldn't care. Nor do I, really, though can't help imagine what went on inside these stripes and creases the last time they were worn. Knowing what evicted their last tenants doesn't help, but my dear insists. That blue one had lung cancer. This chap keeled over with a heart attack, and that red cheque belonged to somebody who disappeared at sea. They never found the corpse, and rumour is he's done a bunk. I wear these other lives like armour, know something of them by their taste in shirts, and there's a smell washed deep into the fabric that persists, though no one else would notice it. At first, I would hear voices when I pulled them on, fossil conversations buried in the weft, could feel resistance to the routine of my dressing. He, buttoned from the bottom, always hung it on a peg, whereas I sense resentment sometimes mirth, as if the cloth were in a constant déjà vu, remembering how the other one had spent like effort to no particular end, had frittered time away on things he knew were unimportant or mere sham. I set to tame the shirts, impose my scent under the arms, adjust the vents, take up a hem, sew name tags along seams, establishing beyond all doubt that they belong to me. But hung to dry, a wind inflates the contours of their pasts, reveals that other lives than mine still occupy their threads, our separate characters in conflict, now warping to adhere. I want to read a poem called, well, in the book it's called Dance Like a Butterfly, Sting Like a Bee, but everybody knows it should be Float Like a Butterfly, Sting Like a Bee. And it uses as its epigraph a review that Derek Walcott got for one of his reading or one of his books of poems, saying Walcott is the heavyweight of the black poetry game. And the occasion for writing the poem was watching Derek Walcott do a reading in London many years ago now, when he was well known, but he wasn't the great figure that he is now. And it was a televised occasion, part of a series of television programs. And so the lights were viciously bright, as they are for TV. And the room that the reading was taking place in was full. The whole audience was white, and Walcott was the only black man. And as he came through the door into the room, he kind of looked in, and it was like a boxer entering the arena, the boxing arena, and he kind of pulled himself up and kind of made himself ready for the battle that was to come, in a sense. And then it struck me that there were these crossovers between the language of poetry and the language of boxing. And of course, Muhammad Ali was another kind of poet. So, float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The hall is full of lights and whites, fat in tuxedos, fanning programs, aficionados, promoters, his fans. Some have paid money, travelled overnight to see him perform. All goes quiet, then the hall erupts as the big man enters, stares at them, hitches his pants in defiance and goes into the old routine. They stir up his hatred, his passion, his fire. He mocks them with unflinching irony and knocks them cold. Pure poetry, the critics write next day, the empire's champ. His mandatory 8 counts, punchy rhymes, those subtle feints and glides endear him to them. They rave about his muscled form, his stunning imagery. He is unmoved by their applause, nurses a pride as bruised as history by his art's indignities. The other reason I wanted to read that poem was it reminded me, I was thinking today about the last time Fred and I shared a platform, and when I was introducing Fred when he came to read in Birmingham. And I was thinking about Muhammad Ali, trying to remember, was it Sonny Liston or Joe Frazier who would refuse to say his name when he changed his name? You don't remember either, do you? That's not much help. Well, that's why I couldn't finish what I was trying to work out this afternoon. But when Cassius Clay, as he was then, changed his name to Muhammad Ali. Whoever was his next opponent refused to call him Muhammad Ali. And in the fight that ensued, Clay, or Muhammad Ali as he had become, could easily have knocked this man out, but he refused to knock him out. He just kept not quite knocking him out, and every time he hit him, he would say, "What's my name? What's my name?" And that reminded me of the occasion when Fred came. And Fred, I know Fred's name is Fred Dagar. I've known this for a long time. But when he first came on the poetry scene, we'd only seen his name written down. And anyway, I had in my head that his name was Fred de Agua. And I knew his name was Fred Dagar, but in the anxiety of introducing people, you get tense. And out of my mouth came Fred de Agua, and it was as if I was telling him what his name was. He was sitting there, and I wouldn't let him change his name. It was me telling him what his name was, and I kind of felt between poems I could hear, "What's my name? What's my name?" I want to read a couple of poems. Olive isn't here. Olive Senior isn't here. But I wanted to read this poem for Olive. It's called Branch. A very crude play on olive and branch. And it was the occasion of the poem was we were in Barbados and we had a conference there, and Archie Markham and Olive and I had a car and we were driving around the island just commenting on various things, and as the conversation went on, somehow the word anemones came up, and Olive can't say anemones. She says and it was a small car and the two of us and so this became a kind of standing joke. And then months later I heard that Olive was vexed with me she wasn't really, but I just heard that she kind of had been telling people this story that we'd been teasing her. Archie Markham and I had been teasing her. So I wrote this poem called Branch for Olive, who couldn't pronounce anemones. Down all the small islands, old people call their poets turn-tongue, which is to say they make up stories too bad, which is to say you can't believe a damn word them fellas does say, unless Naseberry tastes like turpentine mango, or soursop punch like boiled hog plum. But whatever it was I said, I didn't mean it. So you may take this peace offering with a pinch of salt, Olive, though one turned tongue to another should make for straight talking. Not that there is really any peace to make. A little teasing now and then is treasured by the wisest men, as every Jamma woman surely knows. And whatever it was I said, I didn't mean it. But still, I hear you study in revenge, and you, the seventh daughter of a seventh child, or some such blasted foolishness. So me no mess with that. And I say, sorry, Olive, sorry, gal, for whatever it was I said, I didn't mean it. Come, take this bowl of bright anemones in peace and love. Walk good, Olive, darling, walk good. I read that when she came to Wales, and it was the wrong season for anemones, but someone rushed out and I was able to whip out from behind my back a bunch of plastic anemones and give it to her. That was a nice occasion. It was actually come out of that same journey. Yesterday in my talk I was, in passing, vaguely rude about Archie Markham, and I don't really want to be rude about Archie Markham. So I read this poem called Diversions, which is dedicated to him. And it came again out, I think, on that same journey when we were getting lost from time to time. And Barbados, for a small island, has a very large number of roundabouts. And we decided that the large number of roundabouts was so you could make the place feel bigger. If you were stuck on the small island, you could drive round and around, and you'd feel as if you were going somewhere. And this is it was Archie Markham's 60th birthday, I think, and this was written as part of a festschrift for him. It's called Diversions, because he comes from an even smaller island on Montserrat, of course. All roads on small islands meander. It's a way of cheating the claustrophobia, extending the journey from here to there, when those two fickle destinations are so much alike that without the hop and drop, the whine and grind of getting there, there'd be no reason to travel at all. This is not a philosophy the continentals, the peoples of empire, could ever understand. The Romans would have hated it. Why make those unnecessary diversions, those kinks and curves, quirky excursions, when you can drive it straight and true? True indeed. But as every jackass knows, the bald, unvarnished, plain and simple, no ifs, ands, or nothing but the truth is always an illusion, a deceit, an angle, to say it plain, a lie. Who does not need to paint the background in, explain how it and she and there and now and he and then and here are somehow linked? Though not so neatly you could ever draw a map, except the lines that bind them all would twist and bend and curl back over, as if you teased out the strands of a story like spaghetti and dumped them on a plate, just like the Romans make it. But which of them would eat spaghetti without its sauce to spice it up, provide a little flavour for their plain and honest staple? For as one of the boys once said, you're always carrying the island in your head. The road you're on is always somewhere twixt back a bush and down along, meandering like this poem, going nowhere, coming back to praise the quirky traveller's tales of this urbane, restless, small island man. And as I said yesterday, in every review I've ever written about Archie Markham's work, I've always managed to say that it was quirky, which annoys him. So I got quirky into that poem twice. I'm quite proud of that, really. Okay, I want to read a couple of cricket poems, picking up on what I was talking about yesterday, but from a slightly different angle. Cricket's important to me. Indeed, the reason I got to be in Jamaica in the first place, truthfully, was because I played cricket. I played cricket when I was a boy for kind of Hampshire and south of England and stuff, and took MCC coaching qualifications. And when I was applying to I went on VSO, and when they were deciding where to send me, I'm sure they sent me to Jamaica because I had these cricket qualifications. And of course, what does Jamaica need? It needs some not very good English person to come and teach them how to play cricket. Although I like to tell the story, you know, that the great revival in West Indies cricket started around 1972, and that's maybe coincidence, but you know, it's true. But cricket's always seemed to me, in a kind of simplistic way, to give you a morality and a set of rules which, when everything gets complicated, you can kind of fall back on. And the team I played for, I still play for sometimes, there's a village team in mid-Wales called Talgarth. And Talgarth only had one industry, and that was it had one of those huge mental hospitals, Victorian mental hospitals that were built in the 19th century and were still occupied up until the 1970s or 80s even, well into the 80s. And it's a mental hospital that has huge grounds, and among the grounds is a beautiful cricket pitch with one, I think, the best locations I've ever played on. You can look out and you see the whole of mid Wales in front of you on one side, and then behind you see this great Victorian mental hospital. And sometimes when we played there, the people in the hospital used to be brought out and allowed to be, to come around and watch the game. And I've been listed in the handbook of this cricket team for years and years as the club poet, partly ironically because of course the other lads think it's a great joke, but also because I promised them for years and years I would write them this poem. So eventually I got round to it. And it's a poem called Cricket at the Mental. And it's for Gareth Jenkins, who now is the groundsman there. A couple of Myneth Troedd is a hill which you can see in the distance from that ground. And again, if you don't understand cricket, you won't understand much of this, I don't suppose, but anyway. Cricket at the Mental. Looking down from Myneth Troedd, the roofs of the asylum glint and glitter like the portals of some legendary city. And even climbing up the hill from Sanity, the grey-blue mansion perched between black mountains and the green, lush gardens of the Wye seems idyllic. A retreat to envy the sad or mad or hopeless, condemned to spend their lives in there. We come here every weekend to play cricket. Village boys and incomers, farmers, teachers, policemen and preachers, a few docs and nurses too. We are and take a therapy, an entertainment for the inmates on the broken rustic seats. We shuck our ordinary selves for this event, become alike as prisoners or patients in our clean, pressed uniforms, and wait the wise men in white coats who'll judge beyond any reasonable doubt who stays in and who goes out. The man at Deep Square Leg, his back turned on the mental, has the best views in all of Brecconshire, could write a treatise on the cloud formations and the ways the wind drives weather from the west, and the shadows and the glare and the rainbows, and the small lives going on down there in the valleys and farms, along the roads winding to horizons in God knows where. It's no wonder if he gets distracted, has to be called back into the game by someone fielding on the off, concentrating, determined not to glance above the ritual, measured dance that is the game into the mental. It's not so much that he believes the stories or is afraid. The place is sanctuary after all, a place of healing. But it's the way somehow it steals the light and makes you pause just for a second to ask yourself some ridiculous question like, who am I? What am I doing here? What can be the purpose of all this striving? As if the boundary between us and them weren't obvious, like that clear white line he's meant to be defending. Just for a second, mind, don't get me wrong. Always the game's just going on, and he will try again to focus his attention on the bat and ball and join in that loud chorus, asking nothing more profound, more meaningful than, how was that? How was that, umpire? I want to read another cricket poem, set this time in Africa, in Nigeria. If you're lucky, if you're not a major writer, but you're a kind of journeyman figure, if you're lucky, you get what turns out to be an anthology poem. And this is my anthology poem. And it opens, I'm always amazed the doors that poetry opens and where it takes you. This poem's been anthologized in anthologies of travel writing, and last year it was anthologized in the new MCC anthology of cricket poetry. And the deal was that, the usual thing, I'm very sorry, it's poetry, it won't make any money, we can't pay you anything, but we won't give you a fee, but we'll have the launch of the book at Lord's, and we'll have it in the pavilion at Lord's, and you can come. Everybody in the book would have happily, given up £100 and £200 for their poem for the chance to go to Lord's. So they got into a place they wouldn't otherwise be able to go. But the poem is about a very different place from Lord's, although Lord's is mentioned on the way it's. I lived in northern Nigeria in Kano on the edge of the Sahara Desert for several years, and the local club, it wasn't just an expatriate club, it was a club kind of middle-class Nigerians and expatriates of one kind or another, expatriates from all over the world, from all over the world. There was a time when Nigeria had a lot of oil money, and there were huge projects going on all the time, and people from all over the Commonwealth, from India, from New Zealand, from Australia, from the West Indies, were members of this club, and of course they formed a cricket team. But there wasn't any grass. So we had a kind of piece of matting out in the middle of this kind of scrubby bits of Sahara Desert, and put stones around the edge to mark where the boundary might be, and played against other teams of similar ilk from other towns or cities nearby. But this was the time that the drought was on in the Sahara. There's always a drought in the Sahara, but particularly the drought in the Sahel. Believe it or not, they do have lesser and worser droughts there. And the people who live in the Sahel, the Tuareg people, were being driven out by the drought. And it was kind of sad because they're wonderfully dignified people, and they're beautiful people just as spectacle, and they would come out of the desert and you'd see them then having to take more or less demeaning jobs just to survive while the drought lasted. And this poem records a day when this crowd of people, mostly white people playing cricket, but not entirely, were having a game, and this Tuareg marching out of the desert marched across the middle of what we had designated to be our cricket ground. And it struck me looking at him that there was this incomprehension of worlds happening. You know, what did he think was going on? What did I think? You know, I've just made up a story about him. He was making a story about us. And of course, lots of cricket teams are called nomads or travellers, you know, and so the language of those two things crossed over. Couple of words to explain. Bature is the Hausa word for a stranger or a white man usually, and Hausa was the dominant language in the region. It would have been a language that Tuareg would have known, but not his language. I think the rest explains itself. The Tuaregs wear these beautiful dark blue and black robes, and that's how the poem begins. Cricket at Kano. Cerulean and jet, the Tuareg from the Sahel with his bow and arrow stalks the dusty outfield, which is his heritage, his history, like a wraith in some Gothic drama. Squats at deep mid-wicket to watch the strange Bature ritual, the inexplicable dances of the white men in their bleached ceremonial robes. Soon play continues, the intruding spectator ignored, merely a local hazard, like the gully oak at Broadhurst or the boundary stream at Brook. And with eyes closed, behind mosquito screens, the pavilion's ceiling fans rustling an artificial breeze, the sounds of leather on willow, of "Come one, no wait," and "How was that, umpire?" appeal to racial memories, recall the ancestors and holy places of the tribe's formation, Canterbury, Lords, the county ground at York. Such meditation would explain our dancing to the nomad from Niger, but neither he nor we will probe beneath the fictions that our eyes create, our shared humanity obscured by vocabularies of such conflict that their lexicon is silence. So at Stumps, nomad and exile pursue their disparate paths, amicably separate, rooted in certainties centuries old, our rootlessness a fragile bond that will not bear embrace. I want to end with one more poem, again that was written in Africa. It's another kind of meandering poem in a way. It starts off as a poem about locusts and grasshoppers and ends up being a poem about my grandmother who had a stroke when she was in her 50s and could only say the phrase, "I come, I go." That was all she could say. But she was like that for several years, and my mother was able to understand by the inflection that she used that she meant different things. But as a child, I was just struck by all she could say was, "I come, I go, I come, I go." And it seemed, thinking back on it, terribly poignant. Couple of odd words to explain in this poem. Saltarello is it's an Italian dance, jiggy, jiggy, jiggy dance. And I was very pleased the other day that there was a kind of mastermind music program on the radio, and none of the contestants knew what a saltarello was, but I did, because I'd written it years ago. Got it out of a thesaurus, of course. Oh, and I also find these days there's a comparison. There are various comparisons. I have to explain what a Lancaster bomber was to younger audiences. Well, I don't mean that you're an older audience. I mean okay. Springs and balances. October brings the grasshoppers, suddenly sprung into our beds, our tea, our hair, like a plague. Adolescent lizards, wearying of mindless calisthenics, grow paunchy on a few days of such easy meat, adept themselves at frisky saltarello when need be. Eight-legged, headless, up to their craws in spoil, they saunter into shade for feast and sleep, but warily, half-eyed. Who knows what guise inevitable retribution may adopt? This compound once had cats. Their smell still haunts its secret corners. Otherwise, the grasshoppers just die, suddenly, in mid-flight, stoic, pathetically stayed maquettes. They must all die of heart attacks, some mainspring overwound, so they go out as they came in and lived, an arbitrary launch into unknown, anarchistic astronauts, though that implies free will. Perhaps more like those heathen captives of the true God's knights made reluctant missiles for their blessed mangonels, the original doodlebugs screaming as they fell among awestruck comrades or exploded onto granite battlements. Their polished corpses litter the yard. Suddenly, so much jumble, these superbly tailored suits are tossed away with all the other spent containers, except for my few specimens laid out on a sheet of paper like disaster victims waiting to be identified. They look so stern. This a museum samurai, this a folded bishop taken at his prayers, and this dun, gravulent beast that must be near a locust, recalling nothing so much in shape and attitude as a Lancaster bomber standing by at some wartime aerodrome. Paralysed to artifice, these hollow vessels suddenly turn metaphors, being paired to resemblances. They remind of a grandmother struck through her broad soft heart to a kind of imbecility, her only and inexorable chant, I come, I go, I come, I go. Of the small boy dragged from the sports club pool, bearded with foam in his lungs' black blood, nor prayers nor respirator could revive him. Of a history master's virulent aside, statistically, one of you morons should have died before the rest of you get to 25. Suddenly, Paul, in a head-on crash, had obliged. And yet, in those few hours flung between absence and infinity, the grasshoppers must have multiplied, bred another crop of lastic legs, as the children call them, for next year's springs and balances. And that, maybe, should reassure us. My grandmother's exasperated chorus, merely a statement of fact. I come, I go, I come, I go, as October brings the grasshoppers suddenly. Thank you very much.